If you are a poet or just someone interested in reading poems and trying to figure out what is happening in a piece, well, this is a series for you. Welcome, guys, to Fine Print. We are rebooting the series where we closely analyze and read poems and provide a little bit of marginalia. Today, we're going to be looking at a piece called Broken Wind, or Gentle Wind, excuse me, by a poet named Fu Hsuan. It's an older piece, but we're going to be especially focused on staging and developing a poem to hopefully give you some ideas to incorporate into your own pieces as well. And to guide you in this process, there's me. Hi, my name is Geoff with an O. I'm a full poet. Let's bring on our piece for today. Okay, again, the poem's called Gentle Wind. And I'm just going to kind of walk through it so you guys can see it on screen. Let me read through it really quick as well in case you're listening for the audio version. A gentle wind fans the calm night. A bright moon shines on the high tower. A voice whispers when no one answers when I call. A shadow stirs when no one comes when I beckon. The kitchen man brings in a dish of lentils. Wine's there, but I do not fill my cup. Contentment with poverty is fortune's best gift. Riches and honor are the handmaids of disaster. Though gold and gems by the world are sought and prized, to me, they seem no more than weeds or chaff. And again, I'm just going to kind of map out the progression that I see here. And I encourage you to kind of do the same sort of exercise with your own pieces because you start to track, map out the journey that readers go through in your own poems. And one of the things we talk about a lot is there's the metaphor. You have poems that you're reading for the first time. It's almost like stepping into a boat that you've never been on before. You don't know if it's going to take your weight. You don't know if it's going to sink. So we want to establish some level of trust with our reader. And what I see here with this first line, a gentle wind fans the calm night. It's a relatively simple sentence, right? We have subject, a gentle wind, verb, fans, calm night, object. If you're ever writing something and you feel like it's getting complicated, then this is probably the first strategy I recommend writers do. Is let's just simplify. The simplest you can get in American English is subject-verb-object. Subject-verb-object. It's the baseline for everything. It's just having a single subject, single verb, and a single object. Once you start adding in like becauses and ifs and things like that, things start getting complicated. So that's how we start, just simple sentence. In this description, gentle wind fans the calm night. From there, we kind of repeat that structure, right? A bright moon, subject, shines, verb, on the high tower, prepositional phrase. Okay, but we're pretty much following that same sort of pattern. We're just kind of easing our listener into it. Gentle wind fans the calm night. A bright moon shines on the high tower. It's just straight description and world building. So one of the things you also want to be thinking about too is what's kind of the sense we are leaving our reader with to this point. The overwhelming sense I'm getting is calm. These aren't violent images. There's not a lot of, even in some degrees, energy. There's not a lot of tension, right? It's just a wind and a moon. So we have a natural setting. And then we get the man-made with the high tower. The word fans maybe suggests that, hey, things are a little bit hot, potentially. So this is all the world building. We're creating a scene that seems relatively serene. So then what happens? We start with the same sort of pattern, right? Because we've done like a blank, blank, a blank, blank. We continue it, but now we're complicating it. And I think it's coming right at the right moment because if you stay at the same level too long, that causes disinterest in the piece, that causes disinterest in communication. What I often tell my communication students, communication thrives on a little bit of tension. A lot of that tension can come from the uncertainty of knowing how the other person is going to respond, the uncertainty of knowing what comes next. It's the example again. The joke works best the first time. The magic trick works best the first time. As soon as you learn about it and you know what to expect, it loses that energy. And so what we've done with this third line is now we're changing it, right? We have a gentle wind, we have a bright moon, now we have a voice, and then we add in this layer of contrast, the but. A voice whispers, but no one answers And then it gets even more complicated when I call. So we've done a lot, right? We've had these simple sentences. A gentleman fans a calm night. Subject-Verb-Object. A bright moon shines on a high tower. Subject-verb prepositional phrase. Okay. A voice whispers. So this has changed things because now we've added an outside body. Before we've had all these kind of natural elements or man-made elements that are inanimate. But now we have something human. A voice whispers. And it gets complicated. But no one answers. Okay, so now there's this implication that we're expecting some sort of response and we're not getting it. And then it gets even more complicated when I call. The speaker is calling. The speaker wants something. The speaker's acting in a way and not getting a response. That's tension. So notice again that kind of shift between the first two lines and that third line. The third line is where things start to get complicated. We start to get a sense of desire to some degree of what the speaker wants, and it's unfulfilled. No one answers. We then, because that third line introduced thematically a lot of change compared to the first two lines. So the fourth line almost kind of wants to seemingly like ease us again. Okay, because again, there was a big difference between lines 1 and 2 and lines number 3. So what do? We repeat that same idea of line number 3 to kind of calm the waters a little bit. I'm going to throw you the same thing I just threw you a second ago. Okay. A shadow stirs, but no one comes when I beckon. It's the same principles we just saw, right? A shadow stirs. It's that outside action. Uncertainty with it too, right? Before it was a voice, now it's a shadow, so there's like some vagueness to this. Although there's also some humanness to it. And then we get the dissatisfaction, right? No one comes. And then we get somewhat of the urgency when I beckon. Okay. So I really like the staging of these first 4 lines. You have the parallels between these first two. World building, scene setting, focus on inanimate and nature. And then you get the next 2 lines, which do similar things but complicate it because we start to get an idea what the speaker wants and that their needs are not being met. Additionally, we're adding in some human figures like a voice or a shadow, but they remain still very ambiguous. One of the things I hope you're noticing too is that we're operating in twos, right? 1, 2, first 2 lines kind of go together, repeat pattern. 1, 2, lines 3 and 4 operating together. And I think that's something that we see throughout this poem. Our next 2 lines are, the kitchen man brings in a dish of lentils. Notice the sudden shift there immediately just with the. So now we've gone from the indefinite to the definite. There's familiarity here. The speaker knows the kitchen man. There's also this sense of service, right? The kitchen man sounds like it's someone who works in the kitchen, right? They're fulfilling their job, brings in a dish of lentils. Their job is there seemingly to satisfy the speaker. They're bringing food that the speaker needs. So this is the first time that the speaker is finally receiving something. However, it's not something that we've seen explicitly that the speaker wants. Okay, the speaker has wanted someone to answer because they called. The speaker has wanted someone to come because they beckoned. Those things didn't happen. So then when suddenly someone does come, we don't know necessarily if it's what they want. When we see the next line, it kind of follows in that same vein, right? Wine is there, but I do not fill my cup. So again, the speaker has access to something once more, but it doesn't seem to be like the thing necessarily that they want. So again, we see the doubling. And again, like I said earlier, this doubling I think is really helpful from a staging perspective because if you double it, that means that you give your reader a chance to settle with the new idea that you take them on. And if you keep changing after every doubling, it's like, hey, I'm going to show you something new, then you're going to get comfortable with it. I'm going to show you something new, then you're going to get comfortable with it. I'm going to show you something new, then you get comfortable with it. That ability to kind of ease in your reader, I think, is really important. The other thing, too, is that the doubling, each time we double, we complicate further. We start off with a straight description, then we add in the needs and the humanness, then we add in the needs and the relationship with the needs. We're getting things we don't want. Okay, it's gradually building. I think the progression here is very solid. From there, we get into a big shift. To this point, we've been, I want to say narrative based. We haven't really moved through time. Our time is relatively static here, but now we're shifting over to the abstract, the cerebral, the thought. Because before it's been straight description, now we're getting into an actual conclusion to make that we're going to analyze. Contentment with poverty is fortune's best gift. So notice that we're making a conclusion, especially seemingly based on the previous two lines. Okay. It's a big claim. Contentment with poverty is fortune's best gift. And I think this is essential in poems. In poems, we're trying to arrive at some sort of truth or newness or realization that we haven't had before. And this seems to be the realization. And one of the things I think is key with these realizations is they have to be true for the speaker's experience, but not necessarily true universally. This is something that we can believe the speaker believes. They might be wrong. We can debate them. However, and I think this is something that makes poems and art powerful, is if we can make a statement that some people can align with, which means some people can say, yes, I agree with this, or some people can say, no, I disagree. I think we need to avoid that, because if it's just a straight fact, then why are we even saying it? We want to have something that can be a little bit contentious. There has to be a little bit of risk in what we say. Contentment with poverty is fortune's best gift. That's a big claim, right? To say something is fortune's best gift. And notice that we didn't start the poem like this, right? We started the poem with the world building. The poem could have started here, contentment with poverty is fortune's best gift, but then suddenly everything becomes very centered on that. By putting this conclusion later on, farther down in the poem, what it does is it starts to color how we arrived at this conclusion. We're being given things we don't want. We're being given food that we may or may not want, seemingly not wanting, and we're given drink that we don't want. What do we want? We wanted someone to answer us. We wanted someone to come. We didn't get those things. And so it seems to be some sort of analysis again on things we want, things we don't want, things we get, things we wanted to get. And it continues in that same line, right? Or the next line, same idea. That thread. Riches and honor are the handmaids of disaster. We have a speaker who has some negative associations with fortune, with wealth, with riches, with honor, with seemingly another thing. If you think of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there's some contention with elements of status. We're fighting against them. Okay, and if we, it's interesting of bringing up that too, because so if we think of status, I believe on the hierarchy, it's close to, I believe it's higher than belonging. We want to belong to things. And then when we belong to things, we want to have status in those things we belong to in general. This is a speaker that wants something that's lower down on the chain, I believe. They want belonging. They want to have their needs met. They want people to come to them when they call for them. The status, the riches, and the honor, those are things that are less important to the speaker. And in fact, not only are they less important, but for whatever reason, handmaids of disaster. This is a speaker that's had experience where riches and honor have led to very negative experiences. And this is one of the nice things about poems is we don't necessarily have to explain why we feel that way. It can be enough just to make the statement. And I think sometimes we often like over elaborate. I think what can be helpful for our own purposes when we write poems is you can make a statement like this, like riches and honor are the handmaids of disaster. You can make that statement without necessarily exploring all the aspects of it. That being said, I think it can be helpful to think for yourself about what led to those conclusions. What are the experiences you've had or that the speaker has had that led to this? You don't need to mention them, but I think having them in mind can help you keep in mind the story that the speaker is in, the self-story, the self-talk that the speaker has, because then that can influence things like your later word choice. That can influence, where you put the speaker in different situations and things like that. So it has, by having greater awareness of what led to these conclusions, I think it can color the rest of the poem in terms of your word choices and devices you use. You don't need to explore them, but I think having them in mind is helpful. And then we get our final doubling, our final pair. Though golden gems by the world are sought and prized. So it very much is in alignment with what we just said. The 2 lines above this. Contentment with poverty is fortune's best gift. Riches and honor are the handmaids of disaster. Though golden gems by the world are sought and prized. So there's this acknowledgement that, hey, I know that other people want these things. I know that other people are looking for riches and honor. I know that other people are looking for golden gems. But I disagree because contentment with poverty is fortune's best gift. And not even poverty, but the contentment with it, being able to live with it. And then the speaker, to go a step further, to me, they seem no more than weeds or chaff. Though golden gems by the world are sought and prized, to me they seem no more than weeds or chaff. So one final thing I'm noticing with this poem is this is a poem where a speaker has suggested wanting to belong, right? No one answers when I call. No one comes when I beckon. At the same time, this is also a speaker who does not want to belong to everyone. There are specific people the speaker wants to be with. There are other people or concepts of people that the speaker has no interest in belonging to. This is not a speaker that's interested in riches and honor. This is not a speaker that's interested in golden gems. This is a speaker who is, while desiring people, also is staying away from people who view those things, who view golden gems as sought and prized. And I think that's a very complicated relationship. You want to belong, but you want to belong to the right group. That's challenging, especially when you're surrounded by the opposite. This is a speaker who finds himself in a place where there is a kitchen man. This is a speaker who finds himself in a place where there are brought food. This is a speaker where there is drinks of wealth, like wine. This is a speaker who also is not getting the things that they want. So that's the progression I see. I think the doubling here is very effective in terms of the staging. I think that the conclusion that the speaker reaches to by the ends of the poem have been earned by just kind of walking through the world building and the concrete things that are happening. By the time we then get to the ending conclusions, where things suddenly switch to be a little bit more cerebral, less concrete, it makes all of those thoughts much more easier to understand. Whereas if we had just started with the contentment with poverty and didn't have any of the world building, I think that it would have made the poem a bit weaker. Because we need to see those contrasts between what the speaker wants versus what they actually receive. What are your guys' own thoughts on the poem? What are some other things you noticed about the staging that I did not mention today? It would be great to see them in your thoughts. What's up to Unfulfilled hanging out with us? Thanks for your poems as well. It's been great seeing them, different languages too. I will see you all later. We'll be back again next week. Fine Print is a series we're doing now on Wednesdays, right around 11 a.m. New York. I hope to see you guys next week. Thank you for your time. Hope you have a good day, have a good night, and a good afternoon. Take care, guys.